Don't forget to like the video, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to stay updated with our latest stories. But hey, you won't believe what happened when that email popped up and turned my whole day upside down. The email pinged on a Tuesday afternoon, just as the post-lunch slump was settling over the office like a thick woolen blanket. My name is Sarah, and for the past 23 years, I've been a fixture at Pennington Financial, a cog in a well-oiled, if somewhat predictable machine. I've seen trends come and go. Bosses rise and fall, and the coffee in the break room go from decent to dreadful, and thankfully back to passable. The sender line on the email, however, was anything but predictable. Daniel Astor, Mr. Astor, my boss, or as most of us in the experienced, a kinder word than older demographics secretly thought of him, the kid boss. Daniel was all of 32, bright as a new penny, with a fancy MBA and a habit of pacing while he talked like a caged panther contemplating its next strategic move. He'd taken over the department 6 months ago, and his arrival had stirred things up, to say the least. He was polite always, but there was an intensity about him, a restless energy, that made me and others who'd been around the block a few times feel a little like vintage furniture in a minimalist apartment. Solid perhaps, but not quite fitting the new aesthetic. The subject line was simple. Quick chat. My heart did a little tap dance against my ribs. The kind it does when you're walking down a dark street and hear footsteps behind you. A quick chat. With the big boss rarely meant you were about to get a raise or a pat on the back for a job well done, especially not out of the blue. My mind, ever the diligent cataloguer of potential disasters, started flipping through possibilities. Had I missed a deadline? Was there a complaint about my work? After all these years, was I finally being phased out? The thought sent a chill down my spine that had nothing to do with the office air conditioning, which was, as usual, set to Arctic. I glanced around my cubicle. A small personalized square in a sea of identical beige. Photos of my grown children, David and Emily, smiled back at me, their faces forever young in those 5x7 frames. A slightly wilted succulent, a gift from Emily, sat on the corner of my desk. A testament to my less than green thumb, but also to my persistence. I'd kept it alive for a whole year. A small victory. This little space, these little things, they were mine. The thought of it being taken away, or of leaving it before I was ready, felt like a punch to the gut. I clicked open the email. Sarah, could you please stop by my office around 3:30 p.m. today for a quick chat? Daniel, no exclamation points, no smiley faces, just straightforward and to the point, his style. For the next hour and a half, my focus was shot. I reread reports without absorbing a single word, my cursor blinking accusingly on the screen. I discreetly asked Carol from accounting, whose cubicle was next to mine, if she'd heard any rumors, any rumblings of impending doom. Carol, a woman whose ability to ferret out office gossip was legendary, just shrugged, her perfectly plucked eyebrows rising in sympathy. Haven't heard a peep, hun, she'd whispered. But you know how these young ones are. Could be anything or nothing. Helpful, Carol, really helpful. At 3:28 p.m. I stood up, smoothed down the front of my blouse. A sensible navy blue, my go-to for days when I wanted to feel invisible but professional, and took a sip of lukewarm water. My reflection in the darkened computer screen showed a woman with a few more lines around her eyes than she remembered from the year before. Her blonde hair, now more silver than gold, pulled back in a neat clasp. There was a nervousness in my eyes. I could see it. Get a grip, Sarah, I muttered to myself. You've handled tougher things than a 30-something boss. The walk to Daniel Astor's office was geographically speaking short, just down the main corridor, past the humming photocopier. Left at the depressingly artificial ficus tree, and his was the third door on the right. Emotionally, however, it felt like a mile-long trek across a high wire. The corridor seemed unusually quiet, each footfall on the worn carpet echoing louder than it should. The air smelled of industrial cleaner and stale coffee. The familiar scent of my daily grind. Yet today it felt alien, suffused with an undercurrent of anxiety. His office was at the corner, the one with the larger window that overlooked the bustling city street below, a view reserved for those higher up the food chain. The door was slightly ajar, a sliver of light escaping into the hallway. I could hear the low murmur of his voice, though I couldn't make out the words. Was he on the phone? Should I knock? Wait. My palm felt clammy as I raised it. I knocked softly, hesitant. Tap, tap, tap. Come in. Daniel's voice called out clearer now and surprisingly calm. I pushed the door open and stepped inside. Daniel's office was a stark contrast to the rest of the floor's aging decor. It was modern, sleek, with grey walls and abstract art that I didn't pretend to understand. A large, dark wood desk dominated the space, impressively clear of clutter except for a laptop, a stylish pen holder, and a single framed photo that I couldn't quite see from the doorway. He was standing by the window, his back to me, looking out at the city sprawling below. He wasn't on the phone. He was alone. He turned as I entered, and for a moment, he didn't look like the kid boss. He looked thoughtful, maybe even a little tired. There was a faint crease between his eyebrows that hadn't been there a few months ago. Sarah, thanks for coming. Close the door. Please have a seat. He gestured towards one of the two plush visitor chairs facing his desk. They looked far more comfortable than the standard issue chairs most of us had. I closed the door, the click of the latch sounding unervingly final, and sat down, perching on the edge of the cushion. My hands clasped themselves in my lap, a nervous habit I thought I'd conquered years ago. The silence stretched for a moment, thick and heavy. He continued to look out the window for another second or two before turning fully towards me, his expression unreadable. This was it. The reason for the summons. My mind raced, bracing for impact. What on earth could this be about? He wasn't pacing. That was new. He just stood there by the window, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows across his minimalist office. Then he finally walked towards his desk, not sitting down behind it, but leaning against the front edge facing me. It was an unexpectedly informal posture, and it threw me off even more than the summons itself. Asterisk, so Sarah, he began, his voice quiet, almost gentle. It wasn't the tone I'd expected. Not at all. He paused, and his eyes met mine. They were a surprisingly warm shade of hazel, and in that moment they held a seriousness that seemed older than his years. I wanted to talk to you about something. Something a little different. Different. My mind blanked. All my carefully constructed scenarios of doom and gloom flickered and died like faulty fluorescent lights. Different could mean anything. And coming from Daniel Astor, who was himself different from any boss I'd ever had, it was impossible to predict. I just nodded, my throat suddenly too dry to form words, and waited. The city hummed outside, a distant, oblivious soundtrack to the sudden, sharp focus of the room, me, my young boss, and an atmosphere charged with an emotion I couldn't quite name. It wasn't fear anymore. It was anticipation and a dawning sense of an unscripted moment about to unfold. He finally broke the silence, his gaze direct and unwavering. Sarah, he said, his voice still low. I've been going over some of the older project files, the ones from before my time here, specifically the community outreach initiatives from about 10, maybe 15 years ago. My brow furrowed. Community outreach. That was a lifetime ago in corporate years. I'd been heavily involved in. Those passionate about them. Even we partnered with local schools, organized charity drives, things that felt meaningful, tangible. But like so many things, those programs had been quietly shelved when budgets tightened and priorities shifted under previous leadership. Yes, I said, my voice a little rusty. I remember them. I was part of the team that developed a few of those. Daniel nodded slowly, a small, almost imperceptible smile touching his lips. I know you were. Your name is all over the archival reports, not just as a team member, Sarah, but as a lead. The ideas, the groundwork, a lot of it was yours. This was unexpected. I'd assumed all that work, all that passion was long forgotten, buried under layers of corporate restructuring and new strategic imperatives. To hear him bring it up now with such specificity was disorienting. It was a long time ago, I said a touch defensively. Perhaps the company had different priorities then. Maybe he conceded, pushing himself off the desk and taking a few steps towards the window again, then turning back. He wasn't pacing, not in his usual frenetic way, but there was a contained energy about him. But I was looking at the impact reports, the positive press, the employee morale boost, the actual good it did in the community. It was impressive, Sarah. Genuinely impressive. I felt a faint blush creep up my neck. Praise, especially from a boss, was a rare commodity, and from Daniel Astor, it was virtually unheard of, at least in my experience. He was usually more focused on future targets and efficiency gains, not ancient history. Thank you, I murmured, unsure where this was heading. Was he just making polite conversation before delivering bad news? The thought still lingered, a stubborn weed in the garden of my mind. He walked back towards me, and this time he did sit down, but not in his imposing leather throne behind the desk. Instead, he pulled the other visitor's chair a little closer. So, we were sitting almost knee to knee, creating an unexpected sense of intimacy in the spacious office. The formal barrier of the desk was gone, and with it some of my apprehension began to dissolve, replaced by a burgeoning curiosity. Sarah, he said, leaning forward slightly, his voice earnest. The reason I called you in here is because the board as well. They're starting to talk about corporate social responsibility again. Not just as a buzzword for the annual report, but as something meaningful, something we need to reinvest in. My heart gave a little flutter, this time not of anxiety, but of something else. Hope, excitement. It was a feeling I hadn't associated with work in a very long time. They're looking for ideas for direction, Daniel continued. And frankly, a lot of the current proposals I've seen are uninspired, generic, recycled corporate fluff. He wrinkled his nose slightly, a surprisingly human expression that made me see him less as the boss and more as just Daniel. But then I found those old files. Your files, Sarah. And they weren't fluff. They had heart. They had substance. He paused, and his hazel eyes, which I'd always found so hard to read, now seemed to hold a genuine spark of something I could only interpret as respect. I know you've been in your current role for a long time, he said, his tone careful, and you do it well. You're reliable, efficient, everyone says so. Here it comes, I thought, the qualifier. But as I was reading those reports, he went on. I couldn't help but wonder, is your current role truly fulfilling for you? Does it use all of this? He gestured vaguely. But I knew he meant the creativity, the passion, the drive that had poured into those old projects. The question hung in the air between us, startlingly direct, deeply personal. It wasn't a question about my performance metrics or my adherence to company policy. It was a question about me, Sarah, the woman behind the employee number. And it came from the last person I ever expected to ask it. For years, I just assumed no one in management saw beyond my job title, beyond the tasks I completed day in and day out. I'd become adept at compartmentalizing, at leaving my own aspirations and deeper interests at the door, simply because there seemed to be no place for them in the corporate structure as I experienced it. My throat felt tight, fulfilling. For so long, I'd focused on being competent, on being indispensable in my own quiet way, that I hadn't dared to ask myself that question too loudly. The pay was steady. The benefits were good. In this economy, at my age, that was what mattered, wasn't it? But his words, his unexpected acknowledgement of a part of me I thought was long dormant had struck a chord. I enjoyed that work very much, I managed to say, my voice softer than I intended. It felt like we were making a difference. Exactly, Daniel said, his eyes lighting up. Making a difference. That's what's missing. That's what I want to bring back. He leaned back a little, a thoughtful expression on his face. Look, Sarah, this is why I wanted to talk to you off the record for a moment. I have a proposal. It's still just an idea, something I'm formulating to present to the board. But if it goes ahead, I can't think of anyone better to spearhead it. My mind was reeling. Spearhead me after all these years of quietly doing my job, of feeling like I was just part of the background. Was he actually talking about a new opportunity? A significant one? The subtle tension that had filled the room earlier was transforming, morphing into something electric, a current of possibility that I hadn't felt in decades. The office, once a symbol of his authority and my trepidation, now felt like a space of unexpected potential. The city lights were beginning to glitter outside the window as dusk approached. And for the first time in a long, long time, I felt a glimmer of that same light igniting within me. Daniel continued, his voice full of a conviction that was infectious. I'm thinking of proposing a new initiative, a dedicated department almost, focused entirely on meaningful community engagement and sustainable practices. Not just token gestures, but real impactful programs. And I need someone to build it from the ground up. Someone who understands our company, understands our community, and has a genuine passion for this kind of work. Someone with a proven track record, even if that track record is a little dusty. He smiled, then a warm, genuine smile that completely disarmed me. I stared at him, trying to process the enormity of what he was suggesting. A new department, me building. It sounded like a dream. Something I might have fantasized about in my younger, more idealistic days, but had long since dismissed as impractical, impossible. The corporate world as I knew it didn't usually offer second acts like this, especially not to someone who was by most measures in the twilight of her career. Daniel, I don't know what to say, I stammered, the carefully constructed walls of my professional composure beginning to crumble. This wasn't just about a job. It was about being seen, truly seen for abilities and passions I thought were invisible. That's a huge undertaking. It is, he agreed, his expression serious again. And it won't be easy. There will be challenges, pushback, bureaucracy, but I believe it's vital for the future of this company. Not just for our image, but for our soul. If that doesn't sound too dramatic. He paused, then added, and I believe you can do it. Sarah, I saw it in those old reports. The vision, the meticulous planning, the heart, it's all there. The word heart resonated deeply. It was a word rarely used in corporate vernacular, a word I'd carefully guarded, keeping that part of myself separate from my professional life. To hear him use it, to acknowledge that essential human element was profoundly moving. It felt as if a window had been thrown open in a stuffy room, letting in a rush of fresh, clean air. What would this role entail exactly? I asked, my voice still shaky, but a new note of resolve was creeping in. My mind, so recently mired in anxiety, was now racing with a different kind of energy. The thrill of a challenge, the spark of a rekindled purpose. Daniel leaned forward again, his enthusiasm palpable. That's the beauty of it, Sarah. To a large extent, you'd define it. You'd be responsible for developing the strategy, for identifying partner organizations, for building a small team. You'd have a budget, of course, and my full support. You'd be shaping how Pennington Financial gives back, how we connect with the world beyond these office walls. He watched me, his gaze steady, allowing his words to sink in. He wasn't pressuring me, just laying out a possibility, an invitation. The power dynamic between us, the young boss and the seasoned employee, seemed to have momentarily equalized, replaced by a sense of two colleagues exploring an exciting new venture. The respect I was feeling from him was mirrored by a newfound respect I was feeling for him. He wasn't just the kid boss anymore. He was a leader with vision. Someone willing to look beyond the obvious, to dig into the past to find inspiration for the future. This is a lot to take in, I said, finally managing a small, tremulous smile. You've certainly given me something to think about, Daniel. I know, he said gently, and I don't need an answer right now. Take your time. Think about it. Discuss it with your family if you need to. He glanced at the framed photo on his desk, a brief, almost unconscious gesture. I still couldn't quite see it, but it humanized him further. This isn't just a new project, Sarah. It's a chance to build a legacy for you. For the company. A legacy. The word hung in the air, shimmering with significance. For years, I thought my legacy would simply be a record of quiet competence, of tasks efficiently completed. The idea that it could be something more, something that resonated with my deepest values, was overwhelming in the best possible way. The subtle tension from before had completely dissipated, replaced by a profound sense of emotional connection, a shared understanding of purpose that transcended our respective roles. It was a moment of personal discovery for me, a realization that perhaps my journey at Pennington Financial wasn't winding down, but rather preparing for an unexpected, exhilarating new chapter. The vivid descriptions of the setting, his once intimidating office, now seemed different. The modern furniture less stark, the city view outside, less a symbol of corporate hierarchy, and more a vista of possibilities. The interactions so fraught with my own anxieties at the start had become one of the most meaningful conversations of my career. Thank you, Daniel, I said, and this time my voice was firm, imbued with a warmth that came straight from the heart. Thank you for seeing something in me in that old work that I thought was long forgotten. It means more than you know. He smiled, a genuine open smile that reached his eyes. The credit is all yours, Sarah. You did the work. I just happened to find the map. He stood up and I followed suit, feeling a lightness I hadn't experienced in years. The weariness that often clung to me at the end of a workday was gone, replaced by a vibrant energy. Think about it over the next few days, he said as he walked me to the door. Let's talk again early next week. And Sarah, he paused, his hand on the doorknob. Whatever you decide, I want you to know how much I value your contribution to this company. Past and present. Those last words, simple as they were the final piece in the dismantling of my carefully constructed professional defenses. It wasn't just about a new job. It was about acknowledgement, about respect, about feeling truly valued, not just for what I did, but for who I was, for the sum of my experience. As I stepped out of his office and back into the familiar corridor, the fluorescent lights no longer seemed quite so harsh, the air less stale. The world felt a little brighter, a little more hopeful. The walk back to my cubicle wasn't a retreat into a predictable routine. It was a journey towards a decision. A path that had suddenly, unexpectedly opened up before me, leading to a future I hadn't dared to imagine just a few hours earlier. I had a lot to consider, but for the first time in a long time, the prospect of work filled me not with a sense of obligation, but with a quiet, thrilling sense of anticipation. The kid boss had surprised me. All right. He'd given me back a part of myself.